What's up, y'all? My name is JR, and for those of you who don't already know, I'm a huge movie and TV nerd. If you're new here, I appreciate you taking the time to check out my channel. I hope you'll consider sticking around and joining the film community I'm trying to build here on YouTube. So in today's video, I'm going to be breaking down the final episode in Season 3 of the Paramount hit TV show, Mayor of Kingstown. And just so you guys know, this video will contain spoilers, so if you haven't gotten around to watching the episode yet and you don't want to know anything that happens in it, you might want to exit this video now. And with that being said, no more wasting time. Let's get into it. So we start this episode off with a good old-fashioned Mayor Mike monologue as we see the infamous 6th Street Bridge at night. We see the police arrive at both ends of the bridge. We see a shootout between two groups on said bridge. We see Mike on Constantine's boat. He exits the boat, throwing a gun into the water. Now all this happens as Mike remembers. Miriam came to court the day I was sentenced. Charges were too heavy to risk trial, so I pled out. She came that day, and then she visited me inside just once. She only needed one visit because she only had one thing to say. She told me to survive. Miriam knew the prisons, knew both sides of those walls. She knew what survival meant. She was giving me permission to become a stranger to her. She was saying, become something unrecognizable. I took that advice. I didn't know if releasing me was a mistake. No one knew what they were releasing. I did things inside, evil by most moral standards. By my mother's. But did those acts make me evil? The day I got out, my family was there. Miriam was there. She held on to me like it was an act of absolution, forgiveness for the sinner. And I thought maybe I could shed this skin. Maybe I could return to myself. And at that point, the cold open cuts to black. Now, this montage of scenes, it was cleverly conceived because you see that there is a shootout happening on the 6th Street Bridge. And if you've seen previous episodes, you can guess that this is the Crips and the Russians, of course. But when you intercut these scenes with Mike on Constantine's boat, you know that Mike has probably killed someone. You assume Constantine. But if you thought that, then you would be wrong. So it was a great misdirect, turns out. And it does the job of piquing your interest in what the final episode of the season will have to offer, even though I was not a fan of this particular Mayor Mike monologue. So next we see Mike and Bunny standing on Bunny's rooftop together, 12 hours before what we saw on the bridge and on the boat in the cold open. Now Mike tells Bunny that they settle all business today. And he explains, Bunny explains that the deck is stacked in their favor, but that he's still putting his people at risk. Now, Mike tells Bunny that he'll let the Russians know his route and that he'll play dumb as it pertains to the destination. He asks Bunny if he knows where he wants to lead them. Bunny tells Mike that he has a spot, an old ironworks downriver, that he plans to box them in and triangulate gunfire. Mike tells Bunny that if things go south, that he'll let KPD know where to aim and that every Russian soldier will go down, that will be the prize for the cops and the DA. Bunny asks Mike about Constantine. Mike tells Bunny that he'll handle him. Bunny asks Mike if he's going to get his hands dirty, and Mike responds, nothing can wash the blood off these hands. Bunny then asks where this going to leave us then, when the dust settles. Mike responds, us? Bunny explains that there'll be a lot of territory, a whole lot of ambition. Mike explains that Bunny should stay within their borders, that meaning Kingstown. That if he goes across the lines, that there's monsters bigger than him waiting to take all he's got. He tells Bunny to just settle for Kingstown. Bunny asks, what about you? Mike tells Bunny that he'll get some sort of peace, twisted as it is, that's where it leaves them. And then he walks away. Now, all throughout this season, it's been hard to figure out exactly whose side Mike was on, because he's basically spent the entire season telling everybody exactly what they wanted to hear. And though I understand that was a deliberate part of the plot, it made it hard to really enjoy the story this season because you really had no idea what was actually going on. The writers made the mistake of having Mike play 3-card Monty with all the gangs, but at some point, the writers should have clued us in on what was real and what was not, even if the leaders of the gangs didn't understand what was real and what was not. But like I said, here we see Mike and Bunny, best friends forever again, and it feels like at this point, like Mike is trying to expel the out-of-towners more than anything else, which I think, like I said again, would have been helpful to know 4 or 5 episodes ago. But whatever. So the plan seems to be to get rid of Constantine by any means as necessary by the end of the episode. So for now, we'll just go with that. Now next, we see Kyle laying in bed with Tracy and baby Mitch. Now Kyle lays there wide awake as Tracy appears to still be asleep, with baby Mitch swaddled and also seemingly asleep between the two of them. From there, we see Kareem sitting alone at his kitchen table, dressed for work, but there's no breakfast on the table, just a loaded gun, as he contemplates his circumstances. But in the next shot, we see Kareem exit his house, get into his car and drive away. So apparently he has second thoughts about deleting himself, and let's stick a pin in that for now. So from there, we see Ian in an interrogation room at the police station, sitting across from 2 other cops, explaining to them that he let his guard down, that Charlie came at him one time. One of the cops remarks that he's lucky he got his sidearm free. Ian tells him that he doesn't even remember drawing his gun, that it was just instinct. The other cop interjects, "We have all we need, detective." Shit, it doesn't get much cleaner than this, right? "We should have you cleared by the end of the week." Ian thanks the 2 men, and they stand and leave the room. Now, as Ian stands and moves to exit said room, Evelyn enters, and she asks Ian if she can have a minute with him. He agrees, but he tells Evelyn that he has a shitload of paperwork to do. She closes the door to the room, and Ian remarks, "Why is it every time I see you, I feel like I need to call my union rep?" Evelyn just smiles in response before asking Ian how many times he took Charlie Reeves out on their little field trips. Ian tells her about half a dozen times. Evelyn remarks that it was 7 times. Ian says, okay. Evelyn goes on to explain to Ian that he walked Charlie out of Anchor Bay 7 times, 6 times to search for and recover victims' remains, and the 7th time to go to the dentist. Ian tells Evelyn that Charlie requested him to take him to the dentist, and Evelyn asks, doesn't the DLC have a dental plan? Ian tells Evelyn that Charlie's teeth were effed up, that he was eating rocks from the yard. Evelyn responds, "You know what happened the day that you took him to the dentist?" Ian responds, "Not a clue. What?" And then Evelyn declares, "Morrissey was murdered." And at that point, Ian becomes annoyed, responding, "All right, first of all, F you, Evelyn. How long have we known each other? This what you think of me?" Evelyn remarks that she hadn't even asked a question. Ian asks if she's really that desperate for the office. He explains that he brought closure to the families of Charlie's victims, and then he storms out of the room. So look, we finally got the scene where Evelyn is starting to piece everything together about how Morrissey died. And it's certainly something the show needed for both Evelyn's character and for the story as a whole to kind of move along. But I would have rather Evelyn came to Ian with the accusation first and then have had Ian kill Charlie to cover up the crime, putting he and Evelyn directly at odds with one another. I think that would have made for a better story and character arc for everybody involved. And I know Charlie's death is what caused Evelyn to look more closely at the situation, but Evelyn was supposed to be investigating Morrissey's death all season long. She could have easily come across information that pointed in Ian and Charlie's direction before now, but don't mind me, that's just my 2 cents. Anyway, as Ian exits the room, he pours himself a coffee. Evelyn leaves the room and she looks at Ian with this disappointment on her face before Stevie approaches him, telling him that they got a body down by the tracks and that it looks like a hit. Ian follows Stevie out of the station and he asks Ian if everything's all right, and Ian responds simply, yeah. Now, from there, we see Constantine and Iris on his boat, already on that lick. They stay drinking and doing drugs. Boy, I'm talking about any time of day. But Constantine is calling someone with no answer. He hands the phone to Alex, who's standing by, and she leaves. We then find out that he's trying to reach Roman. Iris asks if he's dead. Constantine explains to Iris that Roman is not one for radio silence. Iris then suggests that he maybe ran. Constantine replies, from what? To where? I mean, you've been offered a golden ticket, yet you remain. Roman was never shackled to me. His loyalty was fathomless. Iris then hands Constantine a drink before asking, if he's dead, do we run? Do we stay? Constantine replies, where would I go? I mean, you're free. I am shackled. The question is not, is Roman dead? The question is, who killed him? My logic detects that it was revenge meted out, by the Aryans or Bunny Washington. That's logical. Iris asks, what do you feel? Constantine responds, feel? That I don't allow. No, we have business to attend to. He explains that they're going to do their work until all the work is done, and then he exits the room. So, at this point, it's safe to say that neither Iris or Constantine suspects that Milo is back. So we, the audience, have information that the characters in the story don't yet have. And that sets up for another big reveal towards the end of the episode. So, from there, we see Ian and Stevie and the rest of KPD down at the tracks, where they find my man Roman hanging from the rafters, wearing a gas mask with some of his limbs even removed. Now Mike arrives and Ian tells him that they need to talk about a thing. Mike tells him to go ahead and talk, but Ian says, not here. He then asks Mike if he's heard from Iris. Mike says he hadn't heard from her since yesterday. Ian explains that they need to track Iris, that they have to cut the masked body down, and that he has a feeling that this is Constantine's guy, meaning Roman. Now Mike and Ian approach the body, and Ian explains they're doing more and more to make a statement these days. They tortured the F out of this poor bastard. They took their sweet effing time. Mike asks if it could be Aryan payback, and Ian replies, I don't think so. The gas mask, that's a gulag torture technique. They put the mask on, they put the hands behind the back, they choke off the air. Mike responds, the Russians? Ian asks, you think Constantine's going to be doing this to his own people? Mike replies, no. The other bodies he dropped were all clean kills. This wasn't him. Mike then takes out his cell phone and makes a call, and he leaves the scene with Ian. Now, from there, we see Mike and Ian arrive at the dock near Constantine's boat. Now, Ian stays on the dock as Mike goes aboard. Mike tells Constantine that Roman is dead. Constantine tells Mike that they suspected as much. Iris asks if it was the Aryans. Mike replies, I don't think so. Constantine then explains, we share a common enemy, Mike, a common frustration. Someone detonated a bomb at your mother's funeral. Someone drove a busload of girls into the river. To whom do we credit these actions? Different parties or the same? Corporeal or incorporeal? Mike asks Constantine what he's talking about. Constantine continues, I think it's the same. The same corporeal effing being has returned. Mike reminds Constantine that he saw Milo on the boat when it blew up, that he was there. And Constantine tells Mike that Milo was warned. He survived and now he's here. Mike responds, okay, let him come. Constantine replies, we carry out our business. Mike responds, yeah, nothing changes, and then he exits. So here we see that Constantine is the first of these three to name Milo for basically all the wild shit that has gone down in Kingstown this season. He blames him for the explosion at Miriam's funeral. That means you would expect that he blew up the cars at KPD, but we already had somebody cop to that. And this is where, like I said, the writing kind of goes awry here because it's a little sloppy. If you're trying to convince me that Milo blew up Miriam's funeral and then drove the busloads of girls into the river, but he didn't explode the cars at KPD, because all of these things need to be attributed to one person. Once you start making different people responsible for these things, you have a story that no one can follow. And this was kind of my problem with this season. And now that we have more info, he's also being blamed for having tortured and killed Roman. But what's also kind of funny is that, the writers messed this up because Constantine has kind of known that Tatiana warned Milo all season long. So the fact that now he's saying Milo is back, but he wasn't saying that Milo was back all season was just kind of weird. And, the writers did get me with this one. Even though if you go back to the first video I made on this season, I specifically said that I didn't think Milo was dead. But I'll have to admit that as the season went on and more food got added to the plate, I can admit I forgot about Milo, which is why I was going in circles about who could have killed the busload of girls in the first place. And so I don't know if I give writers credit for surprising me with Milo's return in episode 9, or if I blame them because there was so much misdirection and, with this overcrowded season that he just kind of got lost among all the storylines that went absolutely nowhere. Anyway, as Mike exits Constantine's boat, Ian asks if everything's good. Mike responds, far from it. Ian then explains, okay, I don't want to pile on here, but I got a problem. Mike asks him if it's the chute. He tells him that the chute was clean, that IA is going to clear him. He continues telling Mike that it's Evelyn, that she's looking for the days that he took Charlie out in the field. He goes on to tell Mike that one of those days he took Charlie to the dentist, and that was the day that Morrissey was killed. He tells Mike that he was trying to scare Morrissey and it went down wrong. He tells Mike that Morrissey's recanted, but then he upset Charlie, but that there's no connection because both he and Charlie are dead. Mike asks why he's telling him this, and Ian tells him that Evelyn scares him and that he's worried about her. And then Mike tells him that he should be. Mike thinks, and then he responds, okay, so you're working the case, trying to find this murderer. What do you do? Ian responds, canvass. Mike goes on, right, every house, 5-mile radius, it's a lot of eyes. Mike asks who works the case. Ian tells him it was Keno, my man Keno. He asks if it was an exhaustive investigation. Ian explains that Morrissey was a rat. Mike responds, okay, so that's a hard no. Mike explains to Ian that Evelyn has already pulled the prison records and that she's got somebody investigating the situation out in the field for sure. He tells Ian that she's likely going to be looking into traffic cameras. He asks Ian if he was in his Charger. Ian tells Mike that he was, but that he obscured his plates. Mike responds, right, this just keeps getting better. He's like, Ian, what do you want me to do? Ian replies, just talk to her. She's a townie, Mike. Just tell her to be a team player. Her cure is worse than the disease. Mike tells Ian that he's sorry, that Evelyn is a shark, and that he threw blood in the water. And at that moment, Mike gets a call from Robert explaining that they've got a big problem, and Mike and Ian leave the dock. So here we've got Mike telling Ian that he might be on his own with this thing. And seeing as how he hasn't been banging Evelyn lately, and she's getting help from the state in order to clean up Kingstown, there may literally be nothing he can do to stop what's coming. I guess we'll have to wait till next season to find out. So next we find Kareem in the control room of the prison looking at the camera footage from the bombing. And he looks surprised when he sees Kevin Jackson signaling in the direction of the shooter that killed the guard. He rewinds the footage and he watches it again, freezing it and then watching it from another angle. And finally, a look of great disappointment falls over his face. So from there, we see Mike, Ian, Robert, and Kyle down by the river, with Robert stating that the DA's office is calling him in. Mike remarks that they're calling him in because Morrissey's pinned him as a mass murderer. Robert remarks that they're calling because Ian, effed it up. Ian remarks that Robert would already be in jail if it wasn't for him and that Evelyn's got nothing. Kyle then interjects and says, not yet, but if she puts you in the neighborhood, ... Ian tells Kyle that she's not gonna. Robert reminds Ian that it's not him she's after, that she wants him for the riot. Robert claims that Morrissey was an asshole and a traitor and that he got what he deserved. Ian replies, yes, he did, and you're fucking welcome. Robert explains that he's not going to prison for doing his job. Mike then interjects, explaining that no one's going to prison, that they're not there yet. Robert then responds, so what, Mike? Do I got to state the obvious? You got to shut her down. Mike tells the group that they're shutting down the Russians today, that that's the priority and that they should all focus on that. Robert tells Mike that he will focus on that and that Mike needs to focus on Evelyn, explaining that she's not going to back off unless Mike backs her off. He finally tells Mike to deal with it or he will. Mike then tells Robert that he's not going to do a goddamn thing. Robert replies, well then apply some pressure or I will see done what needs doing. Mike tells Robert that he's not going to touch a hair on Evelyn's head. Robert looks at Mike before he replies, oh shit, you're effing her, aren't you? He then asks, you're effing her and you can't shut her to F up? Ian moves to get between the pair as Robert begins to get animated, eventually walking with Robert to their cars. Now, Kyle stays behind, telling Mike that Evelyn is a problem. Mike replies, she's the least of our problems right now. And we watch over those who can't protect themselves. That is what we do, okay? And that includes Evelyn. Now, Kyle nods in agreement, and then he thinks before asking, what'd you do, Mike? Mike responds, I don't know. What the F did I do now? Kyle replies, to the guard. Tracy told me. Come on. Mike tells Kyle that he did what he would have done. Kyle replies, yeah, only I didn't get to do shit because you did it. Tracy protecting me, you protecting Tracy. Who am I supposed to be watching out for, huh? Mike replies, your family, day and night, that's who. Kyle remarks that it doesn't feel that way. Mike responds, well, it is that way. You're the only good thing left in this town, Kyle. Maybe we're all just looking after that. Kyle responds, I don't deserve that. I don't want it. I don't need it. Mike replies, well, I need it. How about that? I'm your brother, and I'm going to look after you whether you like it or not, so there. Mike then hugs his brother, and he says, okay? And Kyle responds simply, yeah, and the two walk away. And in these two scenes, we see that Rob is truly a piece of work. I have a real problem with someone who does a bad thing and then doubles down by threatening to do an even worse thing so they don't have to pay for the bad thing they already did. I'm more of a, if you mess it up, if you screw up, you pay up kind of guy. You know what I mean? I don't ask people to be free of mistakes. I've certainly made my share. But I do ask that people pay for their mistakes, and at this point, Robert just doesn't get it. He doesn't get it at all. The sheer number of people I've watched him kill since this show started, even women, is just astronomical. He lives for this. He wakes up in the morning to put it in a mother, like to put it in a person's life. Like he's the kind of cop that people talk about being afraid of because he feels like he can do whatever he wants to whoever he wants with no repercussions whatsoever. Basically, the epitome of corrupt. Now, the second thing we see is that Kyle is struggling. And he's been struggling since the show started to find his way. And this is why what Tracy did was so damaging to their family. She could have protected Kyle by minding her business at work, or at least filing the complaint with anonymity so that Kyle would never even have to confront anybody about bothering her. Think about this. These guys just had a meeting about the fact that Morrissey was a rat and he got what he deserved. Well, Tracy's a rat too. What does she deserve? This is my entire point about what she did and why it was a bad decision. And then she made that decision even worse by circumventing her husband and getting Mike involved without his knowledge. Now, maybe if she had told Kyle, he would have involved Mike anyway as backup, but that would have at least been his choice. Not giving a guy like Kyle the opportunity to protect his own family could end up having dire consequences. Remember, I said that. Next, we see Kareem standing outside the prison as Kevin Jackson reports to work. And the pair share salutations before Kareem points to the old warden's quarters, asking Kevin if he knows what that building is. Kareem tells Kevin that the last warden lived there back in the 80s, that he was as corrupt as they come. He tells Kevin that he was outsourcing prison labor for profit and pocketing all the money. Kevin asks what happened to him. Kareem explains that he got his comeuppance, as they all do. He tells Kevin that it's a sin to profit off punishment. Kevin asks, ain't that what the whole system is based on, sir? Kareem responds, no, son, that's not what it's based on. That's what it's been corrupted to. You justify the wrong for the money or the loyalty to family. Kevin replies, you do for those who have done for you, sir. You owe that loyalty. Kareem responds, at what cost? You're going to go through life, Kevin, doing for those who have done for you, and then one day you'll look around and you'll be alone. And that's when you'll realize you always have been. Bunny Washington is not your family, son. He will use you and throw you away. And then Kareem walks off and leaves Kevin outside the prison standing there thinking about what he just said. And here, we finally get some answers about Kevin. He's simply someone, probably from Bunny's neck of the woods, who Bunny helped in some way at some point, and now he's helping Bunny by keeping him informed about what's going on inside the prison. But what's also interesting about this scene is that the advice Kareem gives Kevin is essentially him describing his feelings about his current situation. Kareem surely did some quid pro quo for Mike and the others over his time as a guard and as warden. And now that he needs help, there's no one there to give it. Not even his family, really, as they've all moved out as well. And so Kareem is all alone, and he's a cautionary tale, and he's trying to warn Kevin essentially not to end up like him. I also noticed that after catching Kevin helping Bunny, he didn't ask for his badge or fire him. He didn't even talk of turning him into the company rep who made it a point that Him not knowing who was involved in the bombing from the inside is one of the reasons why they wanted him out. And that combined with the first scene that we saw Kareem in this episode, it made me wonder if Kareem would be long for this world. So next we see Mike on the road, and you know what that means. He's getting a phone call. Now this one's from Bunny, telling him simply that it's in motion. Mike replies, "All right, got it," and then he hangs up. Now from there we see Constantine exiting the club with his men, and he gets a call from Mike telling him that Bunny's people are on the move. He tells Constantine that the Crips will be traveling down Highway 44 and that they'll be taking the 6th Street Bridge out of town. Constantine replies, "No destination?" Mike responds, "Well, if I knew, I'd say." Mike then tells Constantine to just follow them and wait for his moment. Constantine tells Mike that they're well prepared. Mike asks if he has muscle with him. Constantine tells Mike that he's had Roman replaced and that he's safe. Now at that point, we see Iris exits Nova, the club, and gets into one of the cars. Constantine tells Mike that he's so touched that he cares. Mike responds, "Call me when you're done," and hangs up. So now it's become unmistakably clear who is being set up here. Earlier in the season, I wondered if Mike was trying to get rid of everyone by simply having everyone target everyone else. But we've had several pieces of evidence, even in this particular episode, that Mike is clearly on Bunny's side here, which makes me wonder what all that "the next time I see you, I'll kill you" stuff was at the warehouse in front of all the rest of the Crips a few episodes back. And it seems to me like it was piss poor writing is what it was. Anyway, we see Bunny in his factory parking lot with an empty truck. Cole, Bunny's war vet, and I believe his cousin, claims they've got a lot of muscle for an empty shell. Bunny tells him to draw the wolves away from the sheep. He tells Dole to make it feel real, to draw the Russians into the kill zone and then to massacre them. He then addresses the entire group, telling them that Kingstown is their city. The group agrees emphatically before moving to their vehicles. He tells some of the men to watch each other's backs as the group gets into their vehicles and drives away as Bunny stands there looking on. Now from there, we see Mike meeting with Evelyn outside the courthouse. And Mike asks, "What you got on Ian?" Evelyn replies, "Well, that didn't take long." Mike responds, "I keep asking you to back off and you keep doubling down." And then Evelyn replies, "Did I ever say that I was going to back off, Mike? Did I ever say that?" Mike replies, "I don't know." Evelyn looks him in the eye and states, "Here we are." Mike replies, "Yeah, here we are. Come on. We're the good guys here, right?" Evelyn asks if that's how he would describe Robert Sawyer with a straight face. Mike explains that Ian's a good friend. Evelyn replies, "Yeah, we all grew up together. That carries no weight." Mike remarks that it should. He tells Evelyn that there has to be another way. Evelyn explains that she would shoot through a brick wall to get at Robert, and if she has to go through Ian, that she will, because Robert is the greatest evil. Mike explains that Ian is collateral damage. Evelyn explains that Ian is no angel. She tells Mike that she wants Robert. She tells Mike that if he can think of a different way, that she's open, but that she doesn't see it. Mike explains that there's no one evil greater than another in Kingstown. Evelyn claims, "That's bullshit. I don't agree with that. I see good all over. I see good standing right in front of me, and I'm not the only one who sees it." So, look, this is really bad writing. Because as much as Evelyn and Mike bump heads about shit, just like the situation with Robert Sawyer, there's absolutely no way you're going to convince me that she sees Mike as good, as morally good. She just got done saying that Ian is no angel, but Mike has actually done time, and Evelyn's not stupid. She knows how prison works. She knows there's no way Mike survived in jail and didn't do anything that she would find morally objectionable. So while it's true that Evelyn may like Mike, even though in season 1 she was adamant that she didn't like him, that she was just doing just enough to pretend so that Mike wouldn't feel guilty about having sex with her, she has to know he's at the very least a part of the moral gray that exists in Kingstown. The end of this scene was just complete and utter nonsense. And it doesn't even match the character. Evelyn would never say a thing like this. I mean, I think Evelyn is self-aware to understand, okay, I might like sleeping with Mike, but to sit up here and act like Mike is like this guardian angel or this saint that Kingstown needs, that's just wild. Anyway, next we see Mike driving over the 6th Street Bridge, and we hear his voice over again say, I didn't know if releasing me was a mistake. No one knew what they were releasing. I did things inside, evil by most moral standards." Then we see Mike at a prison talking to someone over the phone behind the glass. He continues his previous thought, by my mother's. I did what she told me to do. I survived. And then we see on the other side of the glass is good old Anna Fletcher. You know, the mother who shot the kid who was released from jail after serving time for killing her son earlier this season. And she asks, "What do you want me to say, Mike? What do you want to hear me say?" Mike responds, "Nothing. It's just an effed up day, that's all." Anna replies, "Well, show me one that's not." Mike goes on, "So I did what she told me to do. I survived. And when I got out, she just looks right through me, like I'm an effing stranger." Anna responds, "No, she saw her son. You survived, and your mom didn't give an F how you did it. I wouldn't have cared if you were my boy. You made your way back to yourself. I got no doubt your mom saw that. I saw it when I met you. If I can see it, you're looking for atonement, but you've already atoned. You did your time, Mike. You did your time." And all I have to say is this scene was a complete waste of film. And when you consider that the episode was an hour and 4 minutes long, this 3 minutes could have easily found itself on the cutting room floor. In fact, it probably should have, because it didn't have a thing to do with what's happening right now. Not a goddamn thing. And this is my biggest gripe with this show right now. So many side stories that don't end up amounting to anything. But I'll get into that later in the video. This scene was here just so another person could tell Mike that he's good. And listen, this is complex because I will admit that Mike does good things. I would even say that Mike does something good every episode. But he does a lot of bad too. And you just look, Mike's in a moral gray area. He lives in a moral gray area, in fact. And I'm not going to let, the writers got to stop trying to convince me that Mike's this guardian angel and that he's only doing what Kingstown needs. Mike is the equivalent of a vigilante, like from the superhero comic books and stuff like that, like Batman or something like that. The only difference is he doesn't wear a costume and he actually kills people. Anyway, next we see Kyle and Big Rob in the locker room getting ready for their shift. Rob comes over to Kyle and states, "I love my family, Kyle, but when I'm in uniform, these animals are my family. When I brought you in against my better judgment, that made you family." Kyle remarks that he gets that. He goes on to say that if Mike can't deal with his shit, and if the DA won't back off, then he's going to get asked some questions. That they're going to ask Ian what happened the day Morrissey died, and that they're going to ask him what happened the days of the riots. Kyle responds, "Yeah, and I'm going to tell them what I always told them. You saved our lives. That's it." Robert responds, "And what if they force Ian's hand and he stops towing that line?" Kyle explains that Ian would never rat. Rob remarks that everyone says that till they're processed. He continues, "A cop goes inside and then you segregate him. It's just a matter of time. A crank changes hands. Guards look up at the sky as they tear you up the back." He thinks Ian, he says, "Do you think Ian has it in him to face that kind of shit?" And Kyle responds, "I know he does, because Ian doesn't give a shit. He'd do a bid standing on his head." Rob replies, "All right, what about Mike? Where does he land? He gonna choose me over the DA?" Kyle replies, "Get the F out of here, man." Rob then asks, "Where do you land? I mean, you gonna choose your team over your brother?" That's what we're talking about. If Evelyn keeps coming and Mike can't or won't stop it, then the F you gonna do? Kyle replies, "It's got nothing to do with me." Rob responds, "No, man, it's got everything to do with you, because we're at that point, Kyle, when we gotta choose what effing side you're on." Kyle then asks Robert if he let him join SWAT just so he could have leverage on Mike. Rob replies, "No, you're a good cop," and then he gets up and he walks away. And look, this scene was a good one, and I think it was a necessary one. So, congrats to the writers on that. But the second half of this scene was kind of clunky, because Kyle saying that the situation has nothing to do with him is incredibly naive, and it's essentially, it's just not true. Seeing as how he's literally a witness to what happened with Robert during the riots. So why he would be sitting there going, "It's got nothing to do with me," I don't understand what the writers are writing. The small writing in this show was really, really bad this season. And this isn't even one of those times where Kyle's character is supposed to actually be naive about the situation. Like, he's not a civilian, he's a cop. And he just got done telling both Robert and Mike how this whole thing will go when they met down at the river earlier in the episode. So it's impossible to believe that all of a sudden he doesn't understand how police investigations work. And this is what I mean. The small writing is just awful. Absolutely awful. Awful, awful, awful. Anyway, next we see Kareem standing in a fenced area overlooking the prisoners in the yard. And he's on the phone having a one-way conversation, and it seems as though he's talking to his daughter, asking if she liked the therapist. He tells her that he's proud of her, that she faced her fears, and that she opened up, and that's how you heal. He goes on to tell her to never lose her trusting nature. He then asks to speak to her mom before telling his daughter that he loves her. He goes on to tell his wife that he's good, that it's a good day. He tells her to hug Russell for him and to tell him that he's proud of him. He then tells his wife that he loves her, and he hangs up the phone, standing there looking down at the prisoners outside in the yard. Now, in the very next scene, he walks down to where the prisoners are, and he calls in a prisoner down over the walkie. He then opens the gate and approaches the Aryan set, who look kind of surprised to see him as he yells back the F up over and over again, as the alarm blares and the prisoners begin to kind of make a path for him. Now, Carney, hearing the call over the walkie, jumps up and responds, "We're on our way," and he hurries out of the control room with other COs behind him. Now, back in the yard, Kareem continues to demand that the prisoners back up. Finally, the Northman, the tall, bald dude with the beard that we've been seeing all season, that is credited on IMDb as simply the Northman, he stands and he says, "Stupid motherfucker." He snaps his fingers, and then he is handed a homemade shank. He approaches Kareem and he stabs him in the gut several times. The guards finally arrive on the scene as the other prisoners jump in, beating and stabbing Kareem until he dies. And these scenes were riveting. I gotta say, this was maybe the best scene in the whole episode. And by the time it was done, Kareem, had tears in his eyes, and he was saying goodbye to his family. Given the set of circumstances, I really think the showrunner should have hired the actor who played Kareem's wife in the past episodes, along with 2 child actors to play his children, so that we could hear the other end of the call. That would have made this scene hit so much harder. Also, I thought it was weird that on the last call he would ever make to his family, that he didn't actually talk to his son, that instead he sent messages by his wife to his son. Come on, writers, you got to do better. Damn. As for the scene on the yard, I have to say, I didn't think when Kareem got his ultimatum last episode by the prison rep that this would be where it would end up just a week later. Even after watching him in the early scene, this episode clearly contemplating self-deletion, when he didn't go through with it, I thought it might have just been a momentary lapse in judgment on his part. I guess, this way his family gets what they need instead of him being fired and having to move and start all over again. In my personal opinion, like I said, Kareem was one of the good ones. Though I'm sure he played the game a bit again, like I said, as during his time as a guard, he was thrust into the role of warden, and I do believe it was an impossible job post-riots. He did his best, though, to play it straight, even though Mike had dirt on him because of the prisoner he accidentally killed after coming back to work. And I'm not saying that the one bad thing he did should be excused, but I do understand beating up the guys that beat you up first, especially in that kind of environment, where violence certainly begets violence. So all I can say is rip Kareem, man. And his character arc and his character's contribution to the overall story is one that I approve of wholeheartedly. One of the few. So next we see the Russians in the vehicles chasing the Crips down the highway, their guns at the ready. Now Constantine and Iris are on Constantine's boat, and they find Milo down in the lower deck sitting at the bar with a few of his men waiting for them. He immediately asks Iris if Constantine has told her the story about his mother yet. He tells her that Constantine has a different story for every flower, and that not one of them is true. He explains that Constantine doesn't have to shoot you, he can talk you to death. One of Milo's men then hurries back up the steps, and we hear multiple gunshots ring out, so we can assume that all of Constantine's men are dead. Milo then explains that now they can talk. He has Iris and Constantine sit, explaining that Alex was kind enough to show him in. Constantine remarks, "What is it with these fair-weather females?" Now Iris refuses to sit, and Constantine tells her that it's easier to sit than to stand, that the bullet won't care one way or the other. But Iris continues walking around claiming that she doesn't want to be anywhere near Milo. That's funny because in season 2, she went straight back to Milo. I ain't going to get into all that right now. But Milo remarks that she won't need to be near him for long. He then tells Iris to call Mike using the phone he gave her. This makes Constantine turn and look at her, disappointed. Like Milo, like, "Oh, yeah, you didn't know she was working with Mike the whole time?" Poor Constantine. Milo explains to him that they're all fair weather. He asked, "Did you really think she was returning to you for comfort? She's been in love with Mike since I sent her. She returned to you for him." Iris, Iris explains to Constantine that it was her choice to come back. Milo interjects, "The illusion of choice." Iris responds, "No, it wasn't an effing illusion. It's the reality that I chose." Milo remarks that Iris's tongue has sharpened. He asks Constantine if that's his influence. Iris tells Milo that it's Mike who has influenced her. So Milo asks Iris if Mike has had sex with her yet, and Iris doesn't answer. Milo explains that he had no intention of hurting Mike, that if he wanted him dead, he would be. He then approaches Iris and demands take out the phone and make the effing call. Now, what Milo says in this scene that feels important is that he knows that Iris has a phone given to her by Mike, which, when you combine it with the knowledge that it was Milo who set off the bombs all over Kingstown and dumped the girls into the river, would at least suggest that Milo's been watching everything that's been going on all season long, that he never really left Kingstown at all, which again, I have to say, I give the writers credit for allowing Milo's presence in the story to die down naturally instead of trying what most screenwriters do, which is to convince the audience of a thing by saying it to them over and over again through various characters. But I still have to say that the writing was so sloppy and so messy that probably led to a lot of people probably having no idea that Milo was still alive, especially once we got to about mid-season or so. So back on the street, we see the Crips truck still barreling towards the 6th Street Bridge as the Russians give chase. And as the truck reaches the bridge, the Russians make their move and the shooting starts. The Russians eventually cut off the truck in an attempt to stop it, backing up civilian traffic on the bridge, and both the Crips and Russians then abandon their vehicles, making the bridge their ultimate battleground as they shoot it out, with lots of civilians trapped in their cars between them. Now we find Mike on the road, and he gets a call from Iris's phone, but when Mike answers, it's Milo telling him that Iris is a strong girl. He goes on to tell Mike that Iris refused to call him despite persuasion. And we see that Iris has blood running down her nose, so it would appear she's been hit in the face a few times. Mike asks Milo where he is. He tells Mike that he's where he last saw him, on the same river, on a different boat. He explains that Constantine has always loved the water, and then he hears Mike hang up. And we see Mike turn his car around abruptly and head in the other direction, no doubt toward Constantine's boats at the dock. So here the writers are just simply setting up the showdown on Constantine's boat that we already knew was coming because of the cold opening of the episode. So, we're simply catching up to the present at this point, as the entirety of the episode after the cold open has been one long flashback to 12 hours before. Now, at that moment, Mike gets a call from Ian explaining that there's a gun battle on the 6th Street Bridge, that there's Crips, Russians, and civilians present. He asks Mike if they have any way to mitigate the situation. Mike tells Ian that he doesn't think the genie's going back in the bottle on this one. Ian tells Mike that that's not a solution. Mike tells Ian that Milo's back and that he has Iris. Ian asks how that's even possible. So Ian didn't know Milo was still around, either. He asks, where they are. Mike tells him that they're down by the boat. Ian tells Mike that he'll mobilize a unit and that he and Stevie will be right there. Mike tells Ian that he's going to finish the situation, and he hangs up the phone. So here we get confirmation that, again, Ian, despite pecking the Russians for Roman's death, had no idea that Milo was still in town. So Milo has just been chilling in and around Kingstown with no one having any idea, despite him committing several crimes that got the attention of KPD all around the city all season long. But, the writers want us to believe that nobody could figure this out. Yeah, so, all right. From there, we see Big Rob and Kyle and the rest of KPD SWAT headed to the 6th Street Bridge, sirens blaring. Robert tells the team that they have at least a dozen armed combatants and unknown number of civilians, so they might not know which is which. He goes on to explain to them that target identification is key, that this is what urban warfare is, so they need to keep their heads on the swivel. This scene is in place to set up something that will happen in a later scene, so let's just stick a pin in that until that scene comes around, and then I'll elaborate. So, back on the bridge, the firefight is still happening, with people from both sides being gunned down as the civilians either hide in their vehicles or exit them and run away from the gunfire. Now, the police finally arrive and they block off both sides of the bridge. They exit the vehicles and they work their way toward the gunfire as some of them stop to help civilians get to safety. Now, the Crips, Noticing that the police have cut off both sides of the bridge, they ask Cole what they should do, and he tells them to kill, die, or effing dive, as in dive off the bridge into the water. So they all go back to shooting as they weave between vehicles, using them as cover for the incoming fire from the Russians. Now, back on Constantine's boat, Iris and Constantine sit at the bar as Milo waits for Mike. Milo asks Constantine what fantasies he's concocting. Constantine tells Milo that he's a brutal man. Milo responds, yeah, no less than you, just different in our tastes. You're blowing your boys. You leech off girls like Iris like you've leached off those girls, like you would have leached off those girls that I put into the river. You're more sin eater than killer, but still brutal. Constantine tells Milo that sin eaters devour the sins of the dead, not the living. Milo responds, then you're just a parasite. Constantine asks Milo if he wishes to share his sins, and Milo replies, they're apparent. He goes on to explain to Constantine that he should have just let him go. Constantine remarks that Milo shouldn't have fled, that he should have negotiated his exit. Milo replies, paid my toll? No, I served time for you. Constantine replies, no, you served time for you. You served time because you effed up and failed. Effed up, failed, and surrendered like an effing peasant. Boy, they said the F word a lot in this episode. Milo asks Constantine if he would have done differently. And Constantine replies, I sent you here to oversee a cross-border pipeline, not to play act like some half-movie gangster knocking off armored cars. Milo remarks that that was something for himself. He tells Constantine that he still wants the pipeline. Constantine tells Milo that it's too late. He goes on, kill me? Fine, but they'll never let you live. Milo explains that the fathers have no loyalty or love for Constantine. He tells Constantine that Roman confessed as much, that Roman confessed many things. And at that moment, we hear that Mike has arrived. Milo stands and points his gun at the stairs as Mike appears. Milo asks Mike if he missed him. Mike replies, how can I miss you, Milo, when you never left? It's like a dream come true. Milo replies, what's happened, all that happened, washed away in the river. Can we start there, Mike? Mike asks Milo what he wants. Milo expresses that he wants a return to what was, that he wants his town back. And see, that's why Milo doesn't want to kill Mike, because he wants to basically resume the business arrangement that they've always had. Now, Mike reminds Milo that he's a fugitive, and Milo explains, I'm a dead man, immune to arrest and prosecution. I ran Kingstown from a cell. I can run it from the grave. Mike replies, not alone. And Milo replies, we had a good thing, Mike, Mitch, you and I. Mike tells Milo that he should shoot him now, that he'll put a bullet in him the second he can. Iris smirks at the thought. Milo asks, do you want to know how my parents died, Mike? Because it's not as pretty as Constantine's tales. Mike replies, say what you like. You have nothing to offer me. Milo remarks, there's one thing. There's always one thing. I'll finish what Constantine started. I'll set Iris free. Mike explains that Iris isn't Milo's to set free. Milo replies, or I'll kill her right here in front of you. You have the power. Constantine remarks, let her go, Mike. That's the only good thing that comes from this. Mike asks Iris what she wants to do. Iris says she wants to stay in Kingstown with Mike. But Milo explains that that's not an option. He remarks, if you stay, you die. If you leave, you live. But for this, there is a toll. Iris kills the Sin Eater. Now, back on the bridge, SWAT has arrived, and the officers work their way further onto the bridge, their guns drawn, demanding to see hands from the civilians before telling them to get out of their cars and move behind them as they move along. And after several moments, the shooting starts again, and SWAT returns fire. Now, back on the boat, Constantine assures Iris that it's okay for her to shoot him, but Iris refuses. Milo tells Iris that she's well-versed in violence by now, citing what she did to Joseph. If you remember, Iris killed Joseph in a hotel room when Joseph attempted to pay for her time, I guess, to sleep with her, and Iris didn't want to do it, and Joseph tried to rough her up, and Iris, she got busy. Iris remarks that Joseph deserved to die. Constantine interjects, I deserve to die many times over. You know it. You said as much yourself. It's all right. It's all right, Iris. I give you a pardon. Milo explains, Mike, this is going to happen one way or another, so why not like this? Constantine explains, there's a poetry to it, Michael. Mike explains to Milo that Iris isn't doing his dirty work. Milo asks, but when has she not? Mike replies, not anymore. Milo then responds, okay, let's sweeten the pot. I have something else that you need, or Bunny has. I know where the guns are, where they're not, and that they're not on that effing truck, are they? and we see that Constantine looks surprised to hear that. Now, back on the bridge, SWAT is still getting people out of their cars and off the bridge as the Crips continue shooting. Kyle happens across an anxious civilian man holding a gun, with a scared son in the backseat of the vehicle. He demands to see the man's hands. The man explains that he has the gun to protect his son. It seems like Kyle believes the man because after a few really anxious moments, Kyle lowers his gun and tells the man to just put the gun down. At that moment, the Russians open fire on his position and SWAT returns fire as the man tries to comfort his son. Eventually, one of the police officers is hit and has to be removed from the scene by fellow officers. A few of the Crips are then hit, causing the lone remaining member to walk out with his hands up. The officers order him onto the ground as he shouts that his hands are up. But Big Rob puts him down anyway. You know how Big Rob do. And Kyle becomes incensed. And then right after that, Rob finds a man sitting in the car with his son, and he trains his gun on him, ordering him to drop the weapon as his son cries. Kyle tells Robert that they're innocent, but Big Rob seems to be ignoring his warning, and then finally, Kyle shoots Robert. And, look, this scene was chock full of drama and anxious energy, but I didn't like this, and I'm going to get into why in just a minute. Just stick a pin in that for now. We're almost there. Now, back on the boat, Milo explains that he'll broker the gun sale for Bunny, and he'll give Mike his cut, just like in the old days, like he did with Mitch. He goes on to state that he'll allow Bunny his turf and that they'll resume the balance laws and let bygones be. He then hands Iris a gun so she can shoot Constantine. Now, she doesn't take the gun at first, but Constantine tells her to do so, and still she refuses. Milo then fires a shot at a nearby wall on the boat. Constantine again tells Iris to take the gun, and again Iris says no. Milo then fires a shot into the floor. Constantine remarks, "Take the gun before he kills all three of us." Finally, Milo points the gun directly at Iris, and finally she takes the gun from him. Milo points his gun at Iris, as Iris points the gun he gave her at Constantine's head at point-blank range. Constantine instructs Iris to shoot him. Iris, she hesitates, as Mike just stands there seemingly unmoved, Again, Constantine tells Iris to shoot him, and again, she's just stalling. She can't do it. Finally, Constantine turns his back on Iris, and he calls her Hannah, which I'm assuming is her real name. And once more, he demands that she pull the trigger, and she finally does. She immediately then turns the gun on Milo and pulls the trigger again, 3 times in fact, but the chamber is empty, and Milo remarks, "You only needed 1 bullet." Mike finally steps between Iris and Milo and tells Milo to let Iris go. Milo replies, "No double crosses. Alex is upstairs. She has an envelope with your new life. Passport, bus ticket, destination yours to choose. What Constantine promised, I provide." Mike then turns to Iris and says, "Okay, it's time to go." Iris tells Mike she doesn't want to go. Mike replies, "You had it good here, but I'm not the reason to stay any longer. So you're going to leave and you're never going to look back. I need you to promise me. Promise." Iris replies, "I promise." Mike then continues, "You never want to see me again. Say it." Iris replies, "I never want to see you again." Mike continues, "There's nothing good in this town, Iris. There's nothing good in me. Do you hear me?" And that's kind of weird since all these women have just been telling Mike just how good he is all episode. It's just bananas that, he doesn't think he's good because he's sure being, told he's just the bee's knees by the pygmies. But at this point, we hear multiple shots coming from upstairs, which means Ian and Stevie have arrived. Just in the nick of time, right? Mike uses the commotion to get the drop on Milo and disarm him. Ian and Stevie kill the men outside on the boat and on the dock, and Mike points his gun at Milo down below. Ian comes down the stairs, his gun drawn, and tells Mike that they got a unit on the way, but Mike tells Ian to send the unit away. He then tells Ian to take Iris to the bus station, and Ian does so. Milo explains to Mike, "You can't make business personal. You know not to do that. You're not your brother. We're the same that way." Mike explains, "You bombed that cemetery." Milo explains that he needed an accelerant. Mike continues, "Put those little girls into the river." Milo replies, "What bothers you more, Mike, their gender or their age?" Mike replies, "There's a point of no return, and I think we crossed it," is what he said. Milo tells him not to be so dramatic. He continues, "Nothing phases you. You've sinned, seen sins done. You brush it off your shoulders like dust. I know what you're capable of because I'm capable of the same. I know what you will swallow because I swallow the same poison every day and live. We're the same creature, Mike, and your mother's not dead because of me." At that point, Mike shoots Milo in the shoulder. He replies, "You were saying something about my mother? What was that?" Milo then responds, "She's dead because of you." And at that point, Mike shoots Milo in the head, and his limp body falls to the floor. Mike then stands up. He walks up the steps and outside onto the deck of the boat, throwing the gun into the river, and he starts walking up the dock. And look, after all the trips around the merry-go-round here, I hated how this scene ended. This 20-minute long short film that intercuts to the action on the bridge, because that's exactly what this was. This scene went on for an eternity, and most of the dialogue was nonsense, narratively speaking. All we needed to know in this scene was, one, what does Milo want? He wants to run Kingstown again like he did in season 1 and in season 2 of the show. Oh, and he wants Iris to kill Constantine in exchange for her freedom. And in case you're counting, this is now the third guy that Iris has attachments to that's offered to let her go. I'm just saying. 2, we want to know if Mike's going to give Milo what he wants. Probably not, but after the way this scene ended, I gotta say I'm not so sure. It looked like Mike might have been fine with letting Milo run his game again and restore the balance, as they keep saying all season long. As even Mike has put it this season, I think given the situation, maybe Mike sees Milo as a townie at this point. And then 3, we want to know if Iris was going to kill Constantine or if someone else was going to do it, because we knew Constantine was going to go at the end of this season. We got the answer. She did right after he called her by her real name, which is Hannah, by the way. And 4, is Iris going to leave Kingstown? And at this point, we don't know, but I'll stick a pin in that for just a moment. The point is, all the other talk we had to sit through here was about absolutely nothing. And on top of all that, given how things worked out, I'm left with a pretty important question. Just how long did Mike know Milo was back in town? Because judging by the fact that he just stood there while Milo made Iris kill Constantine, and then how he and Mike were talking right before he killed him, it looked and sounded like Mike may have known Milo was still around for several episodes at this point, and that he didn't like what Milo did throwing the girls in the river. He used a lot of we after Iris left, and the two of them were just there by themselves talking, and it also looked like he was prepared to let Milo go until he brought up his mom. So, was Mike always going to kill Milo, or was it a spur-of-the-moment kind of thing? And the fact that we don't know after watching a 20-minute scene is kind of diabolical work by the writers, if you ask me. And, look, any practiced screenwriter will tell you that you want to get into a scene as late as possible, and you want to get out of a scene as soon as possible. That each scene should maybe last no more than about 2 or 3 pages, which is 2 or 3 minutes. But the writers here tried to get cute. They intercut the scene on Constantine's boat with the shootout on the bridge so they could bring us a short film about Mike and Iris and Constantine and Milo's screwed up dynamic. And look, I understand that sometimes you got to do what you got to do, right? Sometimes you got to cheat to make it work, right? If you ain't cheating, you ain't trying. I understand that in any discipline, you learn the rules of your craft so you can figure out which rules can be bent and which rules can be broken. Hell, the writers for AMC will write a 10-minute scene and then sleep good after they do it, like psychopaths. If you've ever seen The Walking Dead or Fear the Walking Dead or Skateboard with The Walking Dead or Sleepover with The Walking Dead, then you know this. Like I said, the screenwriters for the AMC shows are complete and utter psychos. I myself have even written long scenes before. In Act 3 of my upcoming feature film, I have a scene that's 8 pages long. That's an 8-minute scene. But that scene moves to answer every single question the audience has from Acts 1 and 2, and it also gives information to the character who needs it so they can spend the last 10 minutes of the film figuring out what to do with that information. But that's not what this was. This was 4 characters, well mainly 3, just talking in circles for 20 minutes until 2 of them finally died at the hands of the other 2. Anyway, next, we do indeed see Iris get on the bus, so there's that. She does in fact leave Kingstown, and while sitting on the bus, she takes 2 pills. I don't know what they were exactly, but she takes 2. Keep that in mind. Now, next we see Mike arrive at the bridge. He asks Ian what happened. Ian tells Mike that it was crossfire, that Kyle shot Robert. He tells Mike that Robert's all right, that he took 2 in the vest and 1 in the neck, but that he's stable. Mike asks, it was an accident though, right? Ian tells Mike that he has to keep his head down because they have witnesses saying otherwise. Mike looks confused as Ian explains that they're calling it attempted murder as the police car takes Kyle away. Ian explains that SWAT members and civilians in their cars, along with cell phone footage, confirm the incident. Mike asks where Evelyn is. He approaches her and he tells her that she has to cut Kyle loose. She tells him that she can't. Mike, reminds Evelyn that Kyle's a cop. Evelyn explains that but he shot another cop. Mike explains that it was an accident, not a crime. And Evelyn remarks that she doesn't know that. Mike responds, I do. It's my brother, Evelyn. Evelyn explains to Mike that she warned him that no one would be immune. She tells Mike that Kyle's under arrest and that she's charging him. Mike then tells Evelyn that she can't hold him. And Evelyn explains that she has no choice. So Mike then walks away angry. Ian approaches and telling Mike, again, reminding Mike to keep his head down. He warns Mike not to throw gasoline on a fire. Mike stands in the front of a police barricade and he takes a moment to think. And this was a scene that I actually loved and hated in equal measure, because on the one hand, to see Kyle end up in Evelyn's crosshairs was a total surprise in an actually good way, narrowly speaking. I give a gold star, this one gold star for the writers. I didn't see this coming, but I would have rather Kyle actually killed Robert instead of just wounding him, because we've already done this with Robert. If you remember, at the end of season 2, Robert ended up in the hospital after getting beat up by the Crips. And now, here we are at the end of season 3, and it must be freaking Groundhog's Day, because here's Robert again going to the hospital after somebody does something to him. And look, at least if Robert were dead, his story arc would come to an end in a way that I can live with, given what we've seen to this point. Because either Evelyn's going to finally get Robert and get him up out of here, get him put in jail, or Robert's got to die. Either one is fine with me at this point. Anyway, from there we see Mike speeding through town, and we can see when Mike's phone loses service that he's headed to his cabin. And we get another Mike voiceover stating, they put my belongings in front of me. Paper bag on a steel counter. I pulled on my street clothes, dried blood on my shirt, pocket change and a pocket knife. The sun hits different when you're outside the walls. And then from there we see Iris's bus. Iris is in her seat staring off into nothing as the voiceover continues. I walked into that light. I saw Kyle, barely recognized him, then Mitch, then Miriam. I wanted out of there. Next, we see Kyle in the backseat of the police car headed to the station as the voiceover continues. But I let them hug me, even though I could feel the prison like a breathing thing, pulling at me. We then see that Iris's bus has made a stop, the driver telling the passengers that they have 15 minutes, that they won't be stopping again for 4 hours. The driver then gets back on the bus to survey it, and when he gets to Iris's seat, we see her lifeless body sitting there, dead from an apparent overdose. And next we see Mike arrive at his cabin, and he sits in the car thinking as the voiceover continues, I wasn't who I was when I went in. I shed my old skin to survive. I didn't know if releasing me was a mistake. No one knew what they were releasing. I'd done evil by moral standards, by my mother's, but did that make me evil? Could I shed the skin too and return to myself? And then we cut to black. So, look, I didn't really understand Mike's movements in this sequence of events at all. I mean, Kyle, his brother, his baby brother, is going to jail for a serious crime. How is Mike's first stop not to Tracy's house to tell her what happened? You know, the sister-in-law he beat up a man outside of a bar for instead of letting her husband handle it. And now, when she's really going to need you, you'd rather be alone? The writers were so inconsistent this season, especially when it comes to the characters. And I don't know, man. And, you know, look, that leads me to my conclusion, or in this particular case, my closing thoughts. This season was an absolute mess from a writing standpoint. And I hate saying that as a person who was genuinely excited about this season. But there was just way too much that made absolutely no sense about the season's story arc and the characters. Let's start with Milo. So at the end of season 2, they kill him off. In last season's finale, only to replace him with not one, but 2 new bad guys, making for an extremely crowded season. And though if you go back and check, you'll see that in my episode breakdown of this season again, I said I didn't think that Milo was dead. But I'll admit, with all the going around in circles this season, I completely forgot that Milo was a piece off to the side of the board, and so I didn't even consider that he could have been responsible for a lot of the chaos that ended up being attributed to him this season. But the writers didn't exactly fool me due to smart and cunning storytelling. They did it through complete and utter incompetence. Remember this dude? Yeah, this is Macon. He appeared in episode 4, entitled Ragdog. Now, he's the guy that Bunny captured running through the hood after all those police cars exploded in the parking lot at KPD. Remember when Mike showed up at Bunny's factory and he all but admitted to the bombings before Mike pushed him off a roof? Yeah, That's why I didn't suspect Milo of bombing Mike's mom's funeral, because the writers essentially told us it was somebody else. And if you think about it, everybody was blowing stuff up this season, which doesn't make a whole lot of sense. The Crips tried to blow up Merle in prison. The Aryans apparently blew up the cars at KPD, I suppose. And I guess Milo blew up the bomb at Mike's mom's funeral. And while I suppose the writers have the right to write whatever they want, that it's entirely possible that everybody could just be using the same methods to try and off people. But it's an amateurish way of telling a story with no real thought as to what you want your audience to think as the story unfolds. And if you ask me, it's quite frankly, it's dirty pool. And on top of that, I thought Milo's return was poorly planned. You have Milo out of sight and out of mind for the entire season, only to bring him out of the shadows at the end of episode 9, only to have him killed off, for real this time, by the end of episode 10. And apparently not only was he around, but he seemed to know a lot about what everyone else was doing. The writers could have given us a few hints at this. They could have dropped some breadcrumbs, which is what good writers do. Even if it was just giving us a few extra wide shots of Bunny and the Crips doing things, or of the Aryans' comings and goings, of Constantine and the Russians doing business, of Mike and KPD's doing. The extra wide shots are those shots that you use from far away that kind of will signal to the audience, hey, somebody's watching whatever's happening here from a distance. But nope, not a single breadcrumb was to be had. Not near another. Okay, so let's talk about Anna Fletcher. She was definitely a one-episode character, but we had to sit through scenes of her in 3 episodes, including the finale. Why? She had nothing to do with the narrative at large, so her screen time, in the past episode 2 was a complete waste of time, if you ask me. Rhonda was another character that wasted a lot of film this season. We watched Rhonda show up last season a few times, and then again this season, and the writers seemed to make a big deal about her flirting with Mike as if something would come of it, but nothing ever did. And then she was unceremoniously gunned down by the Aryans inside her hair shop in episode 6. And all she ever did was talk about how important Bunny was to the hood's ecosystem, but we didn't need her for that because Bunny was always talking about how important she was to the hood. So Rhonda, naturally speaking, was redundant. Now, Tracy's season arc was okay, but I ultimately think it hurt her character. She poked her nose in Cherry's business at the prison, and she did it with a zest that was unbecoming. And then, when the consequences of her actions were visited upon her, she called Mike instead of Kyle to handle it, driving a wedge between herself and her husband that, as I said before, would have dire consequences for her family. And this was only done so that her character would have something to do this season, so the writers decided to make her the new Miriam, though she couldn't quite pull it off. Now, C.O. Breen's arc was a push, if you ask me. It did exactly what it was supposed to do, and I'll give the writers credit here that they didn't mess it up. Now, as for Cherry's arc, I could have dealt with what the writers did with her had they found it in themselves to see it through. They might as well have just killed her off because, I don't see her coming back next season to lie in a hospital bed in a coma. So they could have just cut that tie, maybe in the finale, and been done with it and just had Cherry die. You know what I'm saying? Because, if you're not going to finish the character arc, then why come back and start it all over again? Now, Constantine's arc was fine. He came, he saw, he got killed by Milo via Iris. I just wish he had gone out like a G instead of the sad sack he ultimately showed himself to be at the end. With all the whining, it's okay, Iris, I would have rather him just stood up to Milo and be like, do what you got to do. Merle, however, proved to be a waste of time, at least to this point. I don't know why he's in the story because he wasn't really needed with Constantine showing up in Kingstown, but he's here now, and seeing how Raphael didn't manage to kill him, I guess we'll see him next season. We better, because if we don't, then I really don't know what he was doing in the story. So I'll just withhold judgment about Merle until, I guess, next season comes out. And speaking of Raphael, I thought the logistics of his prison break were absolutely nonsensical. I'm not going to lie. I could have written something more believable about him getting out than what the writers gave us. This was the dumbest thing I've ever seen. Other than that, I was fine with everything else that happened with him this season. And shout out to D Smoke. He's doing a really good job playing the character. And I could have been convinced to watch a 10-second scene of him back in prison, and this time for good. But we didn't get that, and I'm okay. It's fine either way. Now, Ian's arc was about what I thought it would be, except for the fact that I had hoped that the writers had found some way for Evelyn to figure out what happened with Morrissey before Ian killed Charlie instead of after. Like maybe Evelyn could have been out in the field with them in episode 9 when Charlie mentioned the man on the porch, and that could have triggered Evelyn's interest in Charlie's comings and goings from the prison with Ian, and then Ian could have panicked and killed him in the car in order to shut him up, which would have really, put Evelyn's antennas up. Either way, I knew Charlie would die by Ian's hand, and I figured it would come sooner rather than later. I think it just happened a little out of order for my liking, but I'm not going to eat the writer's lunch specifically for that when there were so many more things that were done badly than that. Now, as for Charlie, I did think it was a mistake to have him talk to Ian like an adult before he was killed, because it reminded you that he was a complete psychopath. When he talked like a little kid, you almost felt sorry for him, even though you knew he was dangerous, and they showed us how dangerous he was when he killed Morrissey. But I think it would have made his death much more tragic had he been killed not really understanding what he did wrong. But that's just me. Kareem, my man Kareem. Kareem got a raw deal, man. He lost his wife and kids, and it all happened because he had the misfortune to be at work the day the prisoners decided to take over the prison. He had PTSD for real, man, and you really did want the best for him in the long run. Once he came back to work and became the warden, all he wanted to do was his job and look after his family. He didn't want no part of Mike's nonsense, and I gotta admit I respected it. But this season ain't been no crystal stair for my man Kareem, and his last scene was visceral to say the least. I think Kareem was a good man, all things considered. Better than most on this show, yeah, that's for sure. Like I said, the only bad thing he did was he accidentally killed a prisoner that he beat up after coming back to work after the riot in season 1. And though that's something that I would consider to be a big no-no, I wouldn't call Kareem corrupt. In fact, I would call him the opposite, and I hated to see him go out the way that he did. Now, my man Bunny was all over the place this season. He and Mike were friends, as they had been since season 1, and then they were enemies, but then not really. And we kind of get that with Bunny and Mike, sometimes from time to time, Bunny will get upset, and then Mike will have to, let him know what's really good, and then they kind of find their equilibrium again. Bunny listens to Mike for a while, then he goes rogue, but Bunny threatened to kill Mike the next time he saw him in episode 8. And then they were cool again by episode 9. And at first I thought it was some kind of ruse, but nope, just inconsistent writing, something that was very noticeable throughout the season. I like Bunny. He's my favorite character in the show, actually. He's also one of the keys to this show, and how the writers choose to handle him from here on out will determine whether this show tells a good story or a bad one. Now, Robert's season arc was proven to be completely useless in that it was repetitive as hell. He has the potential to be a very pivotal character in this show, but the writers won't get out of the way and let it happen. He is absolutely part of the corruption that needs to be rooted out of the KPD by Evelyn, and that is the point of this story, at least it's supposed to be. But he got beat up by the Crips and went to the hospital at the end of season 2, only to get shot and go back to the hospital in the season finale here. I mean, it's like it's Groundhog's Day around here with this guy, and it's supremely frustrating. And if he was just going to get shot, why the concussion? What did that have to do with anything? And I know some of you might say, well, the concussion could have made Robert more prone to violence, but let's be honest, we've been watching Big Rob put people down, since 2021. He didn't need no concussion to shoot a civilian. Trust me, he didn't need a concussion the first to do any of what happened on the bridge in the finale, episode. Now, as for Iris, I've told you guys she should have been gone since the end of season 1. And I've said that repeatedly this season in the episode breakdowns. She did not serve this story at all this season. And I told you guys that all she could do for the story at this point was to die. And after killing Constantine, that's what she did. But I would have rather she died in Kingstown, where her death could have had a direct impact on Mike. Now, I suppose Mike could somehow find out about her death next season, but honestly, I would have rather Milo killed her and Mike gone full villain mode because of it next season, if I'm being honest. Evelyn's arc is fine, but where she suffered the most was in the small writing. In season 1, she claimed she didn't like Mike, even though she was screwing him in secret. And now in season 3, Mike was sleeping with her in her own bed. She was waking up to him with coffee, kissing him on the mouth before work and calling him babe and all kind of stuff. And it all amounted to nothing because we haven't seen them be romantic since then. And I got to admit, I do think that her and Mike being in a real romantic relationship would have made for a much better falling out in season 4 over Kyle's arrest, if you ask me. And then there's Kyle. He's the other character I have great sympathy for in this story, because all Kyle has been trying to do since the show started is find his place. You know, he transferred to state police at the end of season 1, only to come back to Kingstown when that didn't work out, and now he's transferred to SWAT because he was tired of murder police. But Kyle feels aimless, and his fear is made worse by what Tracy and Mike did concerning C.O. Breen. And I would make the argument that it's the very thing that causes Kyle to shoot Robert on the bridge. I think Kyle wants to make a decision that's his and his alone. He wants agency. Tracy took that away from him when she went around him with Mike. Mike coddles him, and Kyle doesn't like it. Robert is trying to get him to turn on his brother in the event that Evelyn comes for him, and so Kyle lashed out. And the sad part is, I have no idea how Mike gets him out of this one. I mean, I guess we'll see next season, but, you know, it would really be a shame if Kyle, of all people, spends the rest of the series in jail. And last but not least, there's Mike. You know, this season was all about balance. He was all about getting the out-of-towners out of Kingstown. And I guess that's a good enough goal to have. But it also seems to me that Mike doesn't know if he's good or bad, and it doesn't help that people around him keep lying to him about that. The fact that he's both a monster and a saint, as, you know, look, a lot of the characters in this show are. You know, Mike spoke in a voiceover at the beginning of the season about how Mitch used to tell him that 5% of people in the world were truly good and that 5% of the people in the world were truly evil, and that the rest of them wrestled between the two, who they are and what they are. The 90% is where Mike lives, and because it's Kingstown, the gray is exacerbated to the nth degree. And, you know, I wonder if Mike can be saved. I wonder if the town can be saved. And that's another really big piece that will ultimately decide the fate of this show. Now, I give this season a 60% or a 6.0 if you're thinking IMDb score. And I'm not gonna lie to you, the only reason that score is that high is because the acting in this show is superb. But there was just too many characters crowding this season. Too many that we didn't even need to tell the story that we ended up being told. The overall season arc from a macro sense was fine. It was the character arcs that was the biggest problem, and the small writing was a major problem as well, with inconsistencies abound. The writing this season was so inconsistent that by the time we got to mid-season, I honestly didn't understand what I was watching. And, you know, the show eventually found its way to the season's conclusion, but not without stopping for directions like 5 times. I mean, this was bananas this season. And look, this show used to be great, but it hasn't been since season 1. And when I went to Wikipedia, I finally realized why. It's because Taylor Sheridan wrote every episode of this show in season 1. And he's only written 1 episode since then. In fact, almost every episode has had a different writer, and it's clear they aren't reading or watching the episodes that come before the ones they write. And it's causing the characters to be wildly inconsistent. They say one thing one episode and then something completely different an episode later, and that just makes it impossible to know them, which makes watching the show pointless. I think we're more than halfway done in Kingstown. Like, maybe the show will end around season 5 or so. Anything longer than that, and I think the showrunners will absolutely be courting disaster. And, you know, I don't know what the viewership numbers look like, but I can promise you they're steadily declining. That said, I think I'm done making episode by episode breakdowns of this show. I decided to do it this season because the show is one of my favorites. Truly it is. But this season has changed my mind about that. And though I'm sure I will watch this show to its final conclusion because I've already invested so many years, so much time in it. And I really like Jeremy Renner as an actor and a couple of other actors in this show. But making this show appointment television is going to no longer be a priority of mine given what we got this season. And I have no reason to think that the writing will get any better because typically on television shows, the writing gets worse as the show goes on. But I sincerely hope the writers can at least figure out a way to land this plane once we reach our final destination, because they have not handled the turbulence over open water that is this show's 2nd and 3rd season very well at all. But what do you guys think? Did you enjoy this season of The Mayor of Kingstown? What was your favorite storyline? Favorite characters? Let me know in the comments. And for those of you that might be new to the channel, be sure to like and share this video. If you really like the content, Be sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell. That way you'll be notified whenever I drop a new video. Also, be sure to go and check out themadscreenwriter.com for more television and film reviews and info on my upcoming film projects. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and get out of here. I got screenplays to write. I'll catch y'all on the next video.